Pamela Forward is the President and Executive Director of Whistleblowing Canada Research Society. A graduate of Carleton University with a BA in Political Science, graduate studies in conflict resolution, and a master's in legal studies, and a former registered nurse, Pamela has had a varied career in government, federal public service, and advisor to federal cabinet ministers, business, and healthcare. Over the years, much of her work has been with people in conflict and crisis situations. As well, she has coached new mediators in Carleton University's Department of Law Conflict Resolution Program and law students in the University of Ottawa Department of Law. Pamela's experience includes both management and advisory positions at the national and international levels. She has been active in professional organizations, community organizations, and political organizations throughout her career. Her interest in whistleblowing advocacy began in the 1990s when she joined with others to support whistleblowers in the federal public service. She recently completed an in-depth qualitative case study on whistleblowing regarding drug safety issues at Health Canada, which highlighted many system flaws resulting in reprisals against truth tellers and impunity for wrongdoers. This blend of knowledge and experience has stimulated an abiding interest in supporting conflict-friendly, ethical, and accountable organizations, and inspired the founding of Whistleblowing Canada Research Society. A native Newfoundlander, Pamela has traveled extensively, particularly in the Middle and Far East, and has lived in Spain. Thank you so much, Pamela, for joining me today to discuss the work that you do.
Oh, it's my pleasure.
I'm just so excited to have you and talk about this. And I, not too long ago, found out about your organization, Whistleblowing Canada Research Society, and I was so excited to see the work that you're doing because I believe it's long overdue. And can we discuss a bit about the work that you do at Whistleblowing Canada Research Society?
Absolutely. Where would you like to start? Maybe a little bit about the purpose of our organization?
Yes, the purpose and I suppose when you started.
Yeah, and you know, and what stimulated, I guess, the formation of the organization. So the purpose of the organization is to advance education and understanding of the whistleblowing phenomenon through research and sharing that information publicly to inform public discussion and policy development. So the results of that in-depth study of a whistleblowing case at Health Canada concerning unsafe drugs and how they got on the market is really what triggered us. So the research was to try and understand why reprisals occur. And I was familiar with this case from the 90s. So it had always bothered me, you know, why and how it turned out the way it did. So, so what we found really was the reason why we see reprisals and why we saw them in this organization. And from discussions with others, people tell us that these results are typical in other organizations as well. So first of all, the reason was there was weak or flawed legislation. At that time, there was no legislation really. There was just a policy, and then the other reasons were dysfunctional organizational cultures, dysfunctional political cultures, and there was also concerns about the courts and beliefs and ideologies in the courts about whistleblowing and whistleblowers. So we were quite concerned because the characteristics of the organization that made us arrive at the conclusion that this was quite dysfunctional, were things like deceit, impunity, wrong information going right up the line to the deputy minister, then from the deputy minister to the politicians, then from the politicians to Parliament and Canadians. And it was wrong information. The information was that the drug was safe. When I got into the files, what it showed was the organization was told by the experts advising them the drug was not safe, and it hadn't been for 15 years, and there was no reason to keep it on the market. It needed to come off. The decision made by the government was all about self-protection, avoiding lawsuits, and so on. There was not priority of public safety was not there. So a number of people looked at this and said, well, this can't stand. If this is going on in our organizations, we need to look at what's happening. People need to better understand why and look at how this can be turned around so that, workplaces are healthy, people can speak up without worrying about getting fired, or if they're not successful, that it's going to be on their heads, that, people's lives are in danger or in peril. So that's it in short, I guess.
Thank you. Thank you. Actually, Pamela, I was just thinking as you're talking there, maybe just quickly, you could explain to me what a whistleblower even is. Because maybe more people are with whistleblowers than they realize. And we think of whistleblowers as, having access to huge information, but could it be something smaller than that in an organization as well?
Well, it's interesting. So whistleblowers, really, it's becoming increasingly acknowledged that whistleblowers can be anybody who has access to an organization's information. It doesn't have to be necessarily be an employee. It could be, for example, an outsider receiver of services. But, and in fact, in some countries, there's no qualifiers as to who is a whistleblower. It's anybody, any person who reports wrongdoing to somebody who can do something about it, is a whistleblower and deserving of protection. But what you see is that, there are a number of definitions, and governments in Canada in particular have defined whistleblowers, or let's put it this way, the people they're willing to protect, but in fact they don't protect, and that's another issue concerning the laws. But so they define very narrowly who they will accept as a whistleblower. And at the federal level in Canada, they've decided it's just public servants, and not even all of them. Some of them have been left out. And the private sector, there's no legislation. For example, federally regulated companies, there's no legislation protecting whistleblowers or employees who raise concerns. And the same happens in the provinces. It looks like they kind of followed the federal example when they did their legislation as well. So they're all equally as narrow and restricted, I guess, as to who they decide is a whistleblower. Academics say that whistleblowers are any employees, but they only, and mainly they do it because that's who they're studying, and they don't want confusion, about mixing apples and oranges, for example, looking at external and internal. So what they've really done is mostly focus on employees. So that would be internal whistleblowers. And just, I think slowly, they've at least recognized there is a category called outsider whistleblowers, or they've suggested you call them bell ringers. But there's not been much work done about what they experience. But we can tell you it's similar to what, from our experience, just people who call us who are in that position, they experience similar reprisals and retaliation to internal whistleblowers.
Okay, and touching on something that you mentioned earlier, is it fair to say that an organization that engages in reprisals is the same type of organization that would have whistleblowers to begin with? I mean, I guess what I'm saying is, if there's a whistleblower, is it generally a dysfunctional organization? So therefore it would serve that there would be retaliation and reprisals. And if so, can we talk a bit about what a dysfunctional organization looks like?
Well, whistleblowing really is an example of an organizational failure.
Okay.
Now, how big the failure is would remain to be determined. And a lot would tell us about that, depending on how they treat the whistleblower. So, if it's an organization that, something slipped between the cracks and the leaders didn't know what was going on, and it was sort of a one-time thing, they dealt with it appropriately and so on, you couldn't say it's a totally dysfunctional organization. You could say this was an event, an unfortunate event, they've taken steps to fix it and so on.
Sure.
However, if it's an organization where people are afraid to speak up, I mean, because, there hasn't been a public, say, explosion, or somebody hasn't gone public, that doesn't mean that an organization is entirely off the hook and functional, or that the workplace is safe, because people are often afraid to speak up. And that's the other issue. They're afraid of reprisals. And the other reason they don't speak up is because they've probably had the experience of raising concerns before and nothing happens. So why bother? So those are the two main reasons people don't speak up.
Okay, and I know that you have written an article and done some videos touching on what you refer to as the dirty dozen of dysfunctional organizations. Maybe a checklist of what people might be looking out for. Can we discuss what those red flags may be, Pamela?
Sure, absolutely. And just to clarify, this work actually was initiated by academics, Jerkowitz and Giacalone.
Thank you.
And if anyone's interested, they can find the full reference on our website.
Great.
But I thought it was, particularly applicable. And it's something that, if people are sincerely interested in assessing, let's say, the ethical climate in their organizations, they could use it as a guideline for assessment, right? So how did you want to go through them? I mean, I could read them and we could talk a little bit about what some of them are.
Sure, that would be great. Sure.
Sure.
Thank
Okay.
you.
So, first of all, there's deception. I'll just quickly zip through the list, and then you can pick out a few perhaps that you might like to focus on. So
Sure.
deception is one of the organizational characteristics in this list. Dependency, distrust, egoism, immediacy, impiety, impunity, inequality, inhumanity, invariance, narcissism, and obduracy.
Okay.
So this is a pretty horrifying list. However, these academics came to this list after years of study.
Okay, there's one that really stuck out to me that you mentioned, the narcissism, because it seems like in a narcissistic culture, there's a serious invasion of boundaries. I know it's not on the list, but there's an invasion of boundaries, and also a culture of a severe paranoia, a lot of paranoia. Is that something that you have found or come across or can speak about at all?
Well, I'm not. I think just about any psychological dysfunction could be part and parcel of narcissism.
Right.
I'm not particularly aware of the paranoia part, except I am aware that there is a huge tendency to selfishness and exploiting others,
Right.
self-aggrandizement, and a brutish disregard for those who attract attention from oneself. So it's usually about oneself and one's needs. Now, that doesn't mean that paranoia couldn't be part of it, but that's not something that I'm particularly aware of that in this context.
Okay.
Paranoia, of course, can be part and parcel with so many other dysfunctional characteristics as well,
Of course.
like distrust and so on. If there's people don't trust each other in an organization, well, that can descend, into big paranoia, which usually is sort of an exaggeration, really, of reality.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you. And Pamela, I saw a video on your YouTube channel recently, and please correct me if I'm misspeaking here, but I believe you were speaking to Parliament about Bill C-290, and that's a video that's taking off, and the necessity for this. Can we talk about what this is? And I'm also ignorant on this as well. Do we currently have laws federally to protect certain types of whistleblowers, and is there just not enough teeth and enforcement behind them? Or can we just talk, Bill, a bit about what Bill C-290 is and what it can do?
All right. Yes, absolutely. So so the first question, is there a federal law?
Mm-hmm.
Yes, there is.
Okay.
And it's called the Public Servant Disclosure Protection Act, which is a real misnomer because it doesn't protect. And the government both major parties had a hand in creating this law. First was a Liberal government in the 2000s. They came out with the first iteration in 2004, and it was in response to public outrage over the sponsorship scandal. Eventually, the government fell, and the new government took over with a new iteration of the bill, which was no improvement. And they were warned ahead of time by the justice who investigated the sponsorship scandal, Justice Gomery, because his recommendations were about making sure something like that never happened again. He said it would do nothing to help whistleblowers. So they knew it was a law that they wanted to pass for their own reasons, but it had nothing to do with protection, because what it actually did was it controlled and suppressed, so that it didn't work. And eventually it, got to the point where public servants are afraid to speak up. Very few of them will these days. And this Bill C-290 is the first sincere attempt that we have seen in years to improve things for whistleblowers. It was brought forward by a new member of parliament, interestingly, who we spoke with him when we found out about the bill and asked him why did he come forward with these amendments. And he said he received phone calls in his office. He's a member of the Bloc Québécois in Mirabel in Quebec. He was receiving phone calls from whistleblowers, federal whistleblowers, talking about their experiences, asking for help. So he looked at the law, and he was quite frank and honest with us. He said, look, I'm not a lawyer, I'm an economist. But he said, even I could tell, the flaws in this bill. So, and he was right. There was actually a study done by the Government Accountability Project, which is a leading American but internationally renowned organization that protects whistleblowers. They're a nonprofit organization of lawyers, and they also do research. They did it in collaboration with the International Bar Association, and it showed that of 20 best practices that are acknowledged as necessary for a workable protection law for whistleblowers, Canada's had, in effect, it had none. So none. Zero. Well, I'm sorry, one. And that one was to do a review in 5 years. Most new legislation, has a statutory provision. That means, the government is obligated by law to do an assessment within a certain number of years. 5 years seems to be standard, to make sure that the law is doing what it's supposed to do, it's on the right track. But guess what? In Canada, the government decided, and that at that time it was in 2012, so it was a conservative government, they decided not to do it. They simply just didn't do it. And in Canada, if you disobey a statute, that is a felony. It's an indictable offense subject to 2 years in jail. So moving on then, the next attempt was in 2017 when the Liberal government decided to have a parliamentary committee do a review. They came out with an amazing report that was unanimous. They all agreed we need about 20 or more, I think 26 amendments to make this law workable. And guess what happened there? Nothing. The parliamentarians were totally ignored.
Okay.
So when we found out about this, we thought, my goodness, how did this happen? And that's in essence the story of this this new bill, to try to make some changes so that whistleblowers don't have to suffer the terrible things that they suffer in reprisals.
And what do you see going forward with this bill? What's happening? What's happening now with this
Well,
bill?
okay, so I mentioned 20 best practices. It was assessed by GAP, Government Accountability Project. Tom Devine, he is on our advisory board, and it was determined that there are in this bill, it's not a perfect bill, it's just a beginning. It has 8 best practices. We were there. You mentioned the video. It was my opening statement to parliamentarians. It's the committee that's looking at the bill. So it's the legislative process consists of 3 stages. So it passed first and second reading, and actually it's 4. After second reading, if it passes second reading, it's sent to a committee to look at it in more detail and to have hearings, to call in experts, and that's how we got involved. So the committee is made up of members of all parties in proportion to their seats in Parliament, and so they have had hearings. Next in the process will be a clause by clause review, which will take place in the coming weeks. And then they will vote on it. And if it passes the committee stage, it'll go back to Parliament. It's called the report stage, and finally third reading, and Parliament gets to decide whether these amendments will be implemented. We asked for 3 more. We think that it needs 3 more amendments in order to give whistleblowers a fighting chance to prevail, if they have to go to court or to a tribunal.
Okay, great. Thank you. And actually that ties me into something perfectly here, just to wind down a bit, Pamela.
Sure.
How can people support this this work that you're doing going forward, and this bill, and where's the best place to reach out or to get information or to support this?
Well, actually, the best way they can do it is to contact their member of Parliament. So that would be their federal member. And just to let them know, and that's a wonderful question, because what I'm finding just from some of the comments on YouTube, Facebook, LinkedIn, Twitter, is that people are quite stunned to find out that honest Canadians who are trying to protect them from harm and to protect our country, our international borders, are actually being reprised against to such an extent that they lose their jobs, they lose their health, and some of them, not only do they become suicidal. We heard one whistleblower who spoke at the committee who said she knew 4 people who attempted suicide, 3 were successful. And that was as a result of the treatment of not just leaders in organizations, but colleagues who joined in the fray and, ostracized them, humiliated them, harassed them to such an extent they couldn't function anymore.
Yeah, Pamela. And sometimes, I've personally heard of stories where, some of these colleagues will go to friends and family of the person, and it take it outside of the work, and it's absolutely atrocious. It's horrendous. So
Yes.
thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. So people really need to understand that our workplaces can have a huge effect on our quality of life. And if we don't deal with it, I mean, there can be huge impacts that affect the greater society to such an extent that our democracy is under threat as well. And that's the case of the fact now that we're concerned about our elections being influenced by the Chinese Communist Party. So that can be traced back to the suppression of 2 whistleblowers from external affairs 30 years ago. So the consequences and the repercussions of allowing this kind of behavior to continue are huge.
Thank you. I couldn't agree with you more. It's catastrophic. And Pamela, I will give you a quick proper goodbye after we stop recording here, but I'm going to link to the Whistleblowing Canada Research Society website and the YouTube channels. Is there anywhere else that people can follow and hop on board what you're doing?
We have a Facebook page as well.
Perfect.
And also a page on LinkedIn.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. It's an absolute honor to speak with you today. It's just wonderful that there's people out there doing the work that you're doing. Thank you. Thank you very much for your time today.
Oh, not at all. It was my pleasure.
Thank you.